If you think you know how the domestication of the cat really happened, get ready for genetics to debunk everything you were told about its origins on Neolithic farms and reveal a far darker evolutionary journey. In this MeowTube analysis, we will uncover the true history of cats, from their divine status in ancient Egypt to their reign at Versailles, explaining how they used the logistics of the Roman Empire and Viking routes to execute the most successful and silent biological invasion on Earth. Welcome to MeowTube, the channel for cat lovers. Part 1. The mystical origin. We take their presence for granted. We tell ourselves a linear, simple and comforting story. The human being invented agriculture, stored grain, the rodents arrived, and as a logical and inevitable consequence, nature sent us the cat to protect us. We believe it was a contract signed at the dawn of civilization that was never broken. However, history, the true history, written in archaeological strata and in the mitochondrial sequences of DNA, is far more complex, turbulent, and above all, far less inevitable than we think. To begin this journey, we must look toward the golden sand where the cat was not a pet, but a living deity. We must travel to the epicenter of ancient civilization, the Golden Age in Egypt. To understand the magnitude of what happened on the banks of the Nile, we must strip away our modern mindset. Today, a cat is a member of the family. For the ancient Egyptian, the cat was the tangible manifestation of the divine on earth. It was not simply an agricultural utility for pest control, although that was undoubtedly the initial catalyst. The relationship evolved rapidly into a theological symbiosis. Around the year 3000 BC, the figure of the cat began to merge with the national and spiritual identity of Egypt. The central figure of this cult was the goddess Bastet. Originally depicted as a fierce lioness over the centuries, with the progressive softening of customs and the domestication of the animal itself, her iconography mutated. She became a woman with the head of a domestic cat, or, on occasion, simply a seated cat, regal and watchful. Bastet was not a minor goddess. She represented the protection of the home, fertility, music, and pleasure, but she also retained the ferocity of the lioness Sekhmet to punish the enemies of the pharaoh. The cat, by extension, became the bearer of this duality, a being capable of the most absolute tenderness within the home and the most lethal violence against the vermin and serpents that threatened life. The legal status of the cat in ancient Egypt is, perhaps, the most extreme example of animal protection in the history of humanity. Killing a cat, even accidentally, was a crime punishable by the death penalty. There was no trial, no mitigating circumstances, and the social status of the offender made no difference. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus recounted with astonishment an incident in which a Roman, part of a diplomatic delegation in Egypt, accidentally killed a cat. Not even the intervention of the pharaoh, who feared war with Rome, could save the man from the fury of the Egyptian mob, which lynched him on the spot. The life of a cat was worth more than the geopolitical stability of the empire. But the veneration went far beyond the law. It was embedded in mourning and family identity. When a cat died of natural causes in an Egyptian household, the tragedy was not experienced in silence. The entire family entered a period of official and rigorous mourning. According to the texts of Herodotus, the inhabitants of the house shaved their eyebrows. This act, which today might seem eccentric to us, was a public mark of grief, a visual signal that communicated to the community that this family had lost a spiritual protector. The animal's body was not discarded. On the contrary, it was subjected to a costly and complex mummification process using aromatic oils, resins, and high-quality linen bandages, often buried with mummified mice and bowls of milk for its journey to the afterlife. The excavations of the 19th century found entire necropolises dedicated exclusively to felines, more than 300,000 cat mummies preserved with the hope of eternity. This was not merely affection, it was an industry, a state religion, and a way of life. The annual festival of Bastet in this city gathered, according to the chronicles, more than 700,000 pilgrims who arrived on barges along the Nile, celebrating with wine, music, and dancing the existence of these animals. Egypt knew what it had. They were fully aware that they possessed a superior biological technology. The Egyptian cat, descended from Felis sylvestris libica, the African wildcat, was a perfect hunting machine, docile with humans but relentless against the pests that destroyed the granaries of an empire based on wheat. For this reason, the pharaohs imposed what we might call the first technological embargo in history. It was strictly forbidden to export cats outside Egypt. Military and customs units were created whose sole function was to prevent cats from leaving the borders. However, despite threats of death and pharaonic prohibitions, Greek and Phoenician merchants began to steal cats. They became feline smugglers, hiding the animals on their ships to take them to Greece and subsequently to the rest of Mediterranean Europe. It was a systematic theft that broke the Egyptian monopoly and began the slow expansion of Felis catus northward, the failed experiment of China. For decades, it was assumed that all domestic cats, past and present, descended from the same evolutionary lineage that emerged in the Fertile Crescent and Egypt. Domestication was believed to have been a singular event, but a recent study published in high-impact scientific journals such as New Scientist and PLOS One has analyzed feline bone remains from agricultural settlements in China dating back 5,000 years, specifically in the province of Shanxi. What the paleogeneticists found was baffling. The cats that lived with the first Chinese farmers, sharing their homes, protecting their millet silos, and being buried with care similar to their Egyptian counterparts, were not Felis catus. They were not even close relatives. The morphometric analysis of the jaws and bones demonstrated that they were Prionilurus bengalensis, commonly known as the leopard cat. This is not the cat on your sofa. The leopard cat is a distinct species, a small wild feline with distinctive spots and a markedly different temperament, which still inhabits the forests of Asia. What is fascinating about this discovery is that it demonstrates that humanity attempted to domesticate the cat twice, in two different places, with two distinct species. In China, this commensal relationship lasted approximately 3,500 years. It was not a brief flirtation, it was an entire era. The leopard cats adapted to living near humans, attracted by the rodents that infested the millet crops. Humans tolerated their presence and even encouraged their proximity. It seemed that history was going to repeat itself, that Asia would have its own version of the domestic cat derived from the leopard. However, something failed. Unlike the African wildcat, Felis libica, which possesses unique behavioral plasticity and a genetic predisposition toward tameness, or at least social tolerance, the leopard cat never crossed the final threshold of domestication. Despite millennia of cohabitation, it retained its wild nature. When the Silk Road and commercial connections finally brought cats of the African lineage to China, already during the Han Dynasty or shortly before, a massive replacement occurred. The Chinese experiment collapsed. The leopard cats were rapidly displaced. Why? Because the Egyptian cat, the Felis catus we know, was simply better technology. It was more docile, more sociable, more adaptable, and reproduced more easily in captivity. The leopard cat, unable to compete with this charming and efficient invader, abandoned the human settlements. It returned to the forests, to the wild nature from which it had never fully departed. Today, the leopard cat remains a wild animal, a shadow in the jungle, the living reminder of a human failure. Our Asian ancestors tried, coexisted with it for 35 centuries, and yet the relationship broke down. The current genetic verdict is absolute and devastating for any theory of multiple origins. The mitochondrial DNA studies carried out in 2007 and refined over the past decade, analyzing nearly 1,000 cats from around the world, confirm that all current domestic cats, from the street cat of Istanbul to the show Persian in New York, descend exclusively from 5 founding females of Felis silvestris libica from the Near East and North Africa. There is no genetic trace of the leopard cat in our modern cats, except in very recent artificial hybrids such as the Bengal breed, which is a modern creation and not an ancient inheritance. But history is cyclical and cruel. The Egyptian empire would crumble, the ancient gods would be silenced, and a new religious force would arise in Europe and the Middle East. A force that would not see in their eyes the gaze of the goddess Bastet, but the reflection of something far more sinister. The stage was set for the greatest betrayal in the history of the human-animal relationship. The protector of the granaries was about to become public enemy number 1. The Golden Age had ended, the Age of Darkness was approaching. The cat had conquered the ancient world but was unaware that its Golden Age was about to become a medieval nightmare. If you want to witness its fall into hell and the brutal biological revenge that nearly extinguished humanity, subscribe now and activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this evolutionary saga. Part 2. From Gods to Demons. We leave the warm sands of Egypt and enter the superstitious fear of medieval Europe. Here, the cat ceased to be a deity and became a target. It ceased to be the guardian of the home and was transformed, in the eyes of a fanatical society, into the spy of hell itself. The image change. The change did not happen overnight. It was a corrosive and slow process, intimately linked to the collapse of the Roman Empire and the rise of dogmatic Christianity as a unifying and absolute force in Europe. During the Roman era, the cat had enjoyed a pragmatic status. It was a clean, useful animal and a symbol of freedom. The goddess Libertas was often depicted with a cat at her feet. But with the fall of Rome, much of the classical knowledge was lost and rationality was replaced by theological symbolism. In the medieval mindset, the world was a stage of constant battle between God and Satan, and all of nature had to be classified on one of the two sides. The dog, faithful, submissive, and obedient to its master, fitted perfectly into the Christian narrative of the good servant. The cat, however, presented a grave theological problem. It was independent. It did not obey orders. It was nocturnal, moving in the shadows while good Christians slept. Its eyes shone in the darkness. Its sexual life was noisy and public, and its ability to always land on its feet seemed to defy the laws of nature. For a church obsessed with control and submission, the cat was the embodiment of rebellion. You could not dominate it, and what cannot be dominated in the Middle Ages is feared. Little by little, the image of Bastet was inverted. The sacred femininity that the cat represented in the ancient world was now linked to temptation, sin, and, finally, to witchcraft. But what truly sealed the fate of the feline was not popular folklore, but a papal decree that institutionalized hatred, the myth of the condemnation. We enter the 13th century. It is the year 1233. Pope Gregory IX promulgates a document that, according to modern popular culture, was the death sentence for felines, the papal bull vox in Rama. For a long time it has been said that the impact of this text was nuclear, that by associating the cat, especially the black one, with satanic rituals, the Pope legitimized a mass extermination in the name of faith. The traditional narrative tells us that killing a cat ceased to be cruelty and became spiritual cleansing. It is said that the Inquisition included the feline in its proceedings and that the animal nearly disappeared from the face of Europe. But here history becomes more complex and fascinating than we believed. The reality, supported by science and historical archives, is that Pope Gregory IX never ordered the killing of cats. The bullvox in Rama was not an edict against animals, but a warning against a specific heretical sect in the Rhineland, Germany, that supposedly used statues of black cats in its rituals. There is no documentary or archaeological evidence of a systematic massacre. In fact, the medieval manuscripts of the period are full of illustrations of cats hunting mice in monasteries and homes, demonstrating that they continued to be common animals valued for their usefulness. However, the myth of the extermination has survived because it poetically explains one of humanity's greatest tragedies, the Black Death of the mid-14th century. The irony we commonly tell is devastating, that Europeans, in their religious zeal, eliminated their only biological barrier and allowed the black rat to multiply unchecked, carrying the flea that transmitted the bacterium Yersinia pestis. But current science tells us that even with millions of cats, the plague would have been unstoppable. The bacterium was so virulent and the hygiene conditions so precarious that not even the most efficient predator in the world could have contained the apocalypse that wiped out a third of the European population. Even so, the stigma endured. Although there was no official extermination order, the symbolic association between the cat, suspicion, and the occult seeped into folklore. The cat did not survive by hiding from papal armies, but simply by doing what it does best, being indispensable. Who were its true protectors in this climate of superstition? Sailors. While on land, some saw in the cat a symbol of bad luck. At sea, the law was pragmatism. For a ship's captain, a rat was not a theological matter. It was a threat that could destroy the provisions and the hull. A ship without cats was a doomed ship. Sailors kept cats safe, turning their decks into floating sanctuaries. In fact, the idea of 9 lives was born here. The astonishing ability of these animals to survive shipwrecks and falls from the masts was interpreted as protective magic. But the image of the cat had been tarnished by popular superstition. Hundreds of years had to pass before humanity forgave the cat for crimes that existed only in the medieval imagination. Today, science is using DNA to rewrite this history, revealing that its true global conquest was not an act of war or religion, but a silent invasion carried on the back of the greatest empire that ever existed. If this story of resistance has impacted you and you want to support this historical analysis, give the video a like right now. Let's go for the final twist. Modern science is about to reveal the true invasion. Part 3. The silent invasion. How Rome gave us the modern cat. The most recent genetic studies of 2024 and 2025 shatter the romantic Neolithic narrative. Brace yourselves, because the story that the cat has been with us since the beginning of agriculture is, to a large extent, a comforting lie we have told ourselves to feel in control. The general consensus, repeated in documentaries and textbooks for decades, claimed that the domestic cat appeared between 6,000 and 9,000 years ago, coinciding with the birth of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. The logic was seductive. Humans settle down, cultivate grain, the grain attracts mice, and wildcats move in with us, instantly becoming pets. It was a simple equation: farm plus mouse equals domestic cat. But paleogenetics has revealed that this equation is incomplete and misleading. A comprehensive study published in the journal Science and corroborated by subsequent ancient DNA analyses, which sequenced the genome of more than 200 cats spanning 9,000 years of history, from the Mesolithic to the modern era, has shed a blinding light on reality. The results are unequivocal. Those first cats that roamed the Neolithic settlements in Anatolia and the Levant were not domestic. The analysis of their genetic markers demonstrates that for thousands of years, the cats living near humans were indistinguishable from their wild relatives, Felis silvestris. There was no artificial selection. There were no changes in their coat. There were no alterations in their bone structure indicating dependence. Those cats were opportunists, commensals who were just passing through, tolerating our presence in order to hunt, but not living with us. They were not our pets. They were wild neighbors who used our farms as hunting grounds. The true domestication, the biological and behavioral transformation that turns a wild animal into a household companion, did not occur on those first mud farms. The true expansive wave. The silent invasion that placed the cat at the center of Western civilization occurred much later and was driven not by peaceful farmers, but by the most efficient military and logistical machine of antiquity, the Roman Empire. To understand this, we must look at the infrastructure of the empire. Rome was sustained not only by swords but by wheat. Grain was the oil of antiquity. The cura annoni, the grain supply for the city of Rome and its legions, required moving millions of tons of cereal from Egypt, the granary of the empire, across the Mediterranean to every corner of Europe. And where grain is stored in ships and imperial granaries, there are rats. The black rat was the #1 strategic threat to Rome's food security. The Romans, pragmatic to the core, adopted the Egyptian technology. They massively imported cats of the Felis libica lineage from North Africa. But unlike the Greeks, who kept them as exotic curiosities, the Romans industrialized their use. The cat became standard equipment. Where a Roman legion went, a cat went. Where a Roman merchant ship docked, a cat disembarked. The study of archaeological remains in ancient Roman forts, from the borders of Scotland to the ports of the Black Sea, shows a sudden and uniform appearance of this Egyptian lineage around the turn of the era. It was a planned colonization. The cat traveled along the Roman roads, conquering Europe not by force but by utility. They infiltrated Gaul, Hispania, Germania, and Britannia, carried in supply wagons and in the packs of soldiers. Rome gave us law, architecture, Latin, and silently imposed the cat upon us, the final conquest. But the conquest did not stop when Rome fell. In fact, it found a new and surprising ally in the barbarians of the north, the Vikings. This is another of the fascinating twists that genetics has confirmed. We might picture the Vikings with great war dogs or wolves, but the DNA evidence extracted from Viking sites in northern Germany and Scandinavia, such as the ancient trading port of Ralswiek, shows a massive presence of cats with Egyptian lineage. The Vikings, supreme navigators, quickly understood the value of this animal. They brought cats aboard their longships during their long voyages to Iceland, Greenland, and possibly even to the coasts of North America. The Vikings did not only use them to hunt mice, their fur was a valuable resource in the cold north. Although it sounds cruel to our modern sensibilities, this commercial demand for cat fur helped expand their population and breed larger and more robust animals. It was the Viking trade route that finished sowing the cat throughout the most remote corners of northern Europe, places where the native wildcat would never have entered human homes, returned to grace. The 18th and 19th centuries and the Enlightenment brought with them a new rationality. Powerful figures began to challenge the old superstitions. King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, played a crucial though often forgotten role. He officially banned the burning of cats on the night of St. John. This royal decree was not merely a legal act, it was a cultural message. If the king forbade their burning, the cat ceased to be an official demon. The French aristocracy began to adopt the cat as a symbol of elegance and mystery, distancing it from the image of poverty and witchcraft. Cardinal Richelieu, the most powerful man in France before Louis XIV, had been a famous lover of cats, bequeathing a fortune for their care after his death. These figures of authority began to change public perception, but the coup de grâce, the true rehabilitation, that allowed the cat to enter our bedrooms and not only our granaries, came at the hands of Louis Pasteur and the hygienist revolution of the 19th century. When Pasteur demonstrated the germ theory, humanity understood that disease did not come from evil spirits or from the familiars of witches, but from bacteria and filth. Suddenly the cat, an animal that washes itself obsessively, buries its waste, and eliminates rats, carriers of disease, was re-evaluated. It went from being a suspicious animal to being the epitome of domestic hygiene. Owning a cat became a sign of a clean and modern home. Science, which had once been used by theology to condemn it, now absolved and elevated it. Today, it is estimated that there are more than 500 million domestic cats in the world. They have conquered every continent except Antarctica. They outnumber dogs in many developed countries. They dominate popular culture and are the undisputed kings of the internet. We did not domesticate the cat. We did not capture it. We did not enclose it in pens, and we did not force it to obey as we did with the cow, the horse, or the dog. The cat domesticated itself. It took the initiative. It decided to approach. It manipulated our biology, developing a meow that mimics the frequency of a human baby's cry to hack our brain and trigger an instinctive caregiving response. In the great game of evolution, the cat has executed the perfect strategy. It has gone from being a solitary predator in the desert to becoming the most beloved and successful parasite in the history of the earth. They look at us from the sofa with that regal indifference because, deep down, they know the truth that science has just confirmed. They are not our pets. We are their final conquest. And so, as you stroke your cat tonight, remember, you are not stroking a simple animal. You are touching a survivor of empires, a time traveler who cheated death and who, silently, step by step, from the banks of the Nile to the screen of your phone, has taken over the world. Now that you know their true identity, look at your cat and recognize the silent emperor who survived history to claim your home. If you want to keep discovering the hidden narratives that science reveals to us, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next investigation. Tell us in the comments whether you think your feline still retains that wild instinct or whether it has already completed its domestication over you. See you in the next video. If this journey has fascinated you, join us to reveal the next great mystery of the feline kingdom.